background of Hindu belief is that in the beginning there was the 4 sacred Vedas, which were Indian liturgical texts. And then after the creation of the earth, the Golden Age commenced. But in the Golden Age, there was no knowledge of sadness, and since drama has to acknowledge both the happiness and the sadness in life, drama could not exist. So all the other gods, they come up to Brahma on one day and they're like, we want a 5th Veda that we're going to call drama. And so he takes recitation from the Rig Veda, song from the Sama Veda, mimicry from the Yajur Veda, and sentiment from the Atharva Veda, and with this he makes the 5th Veda, which was drama. Then he enlists the holy architect Vikarma to build a heavenly playhouse, and he tells the sage Bharata that he is to carry out this 5th Veda. The real story is drama came out of Vedic priests assuming the roles of gods to tell the stories of what was happening in heaven. And the earliest recitation of something other than religious stuff comes from the 2nd century AD when they would recite the epic legend of Ramayana, which I will not go into because it takes a long time to tell. Development, early examples of dramatic performances came as early as the 7th century AD when they would recite pieces from Bharata's Natyashastra, which is actually this entire compendium of how to perform theater according to the gods. So they would recite sections of that. And this guy named Patanjali also describes a law passed by an Indian emperor that said, if you saw something happen, you have to tell it in the present tense like it's happening right now. And that is sort of evidence of dramatic performances. And his example, he kind of tells of an Indian Hamlet involving a prince and his dead father, and the prince killing his uncle who killed his dead father. And it's funny how you see stories all like that all over the place. And the last example is the Mahabharata, which is another religious text, makes specific mention of dramatic elements like no-show, recitation between 2 people, and also song and dance. A Sanskrit theater. The Natyashastra says that the playhouse should have the form of a mountain cave and 2 stories, so you can kind of see it right there. That's a picture of what people think is the earliest theater in India, so from ancient India. It also lists 3 types of theaters that there could be. There could be, well, the heavenly theater that was built by Vikarma, however you pronounce it. A rectangular theater, which was praised for its acoustics, and a triangular theater, which was just another variation that they had. Seats would be in wooden rows, and they would designate who got to sit where, like who had what status by different colored pillars that would be at the end of the rows. And they were wooden seats. The actors were called Nata. There would be one lead actor called the Sutradhara, who basically would act as director and resident genius, because the classification in the Natyashastra for a Sutradhara was basically they had to be knowledgeable in every area of life that ancient Indians knew, and that is not an exaggeration. The actors would be in traveling troupes, but they wouldn't, not like Elizabethan actors where they're just like, oh, we're going to travel to this city and perform in this bar. They would travel all over the country, but they would be commissioned by rich people to perform. Women were allowed, but the female roles were still reserved for men. Women were just there for singing and dancing. And actors actually had a really bad reputation, like the rest of the world.
As it still is today.
Yeah. The stage would be adorned with pictures and just one curtain in the back. And one of my favorite things that I learned about Sanskrit drama is that whenever you enter in a Sanskrit play, you throw the curtain to the side as hard as you can, even if it's not a dramatic entrance.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Exactly, every play. They had no attempt at realism in their scenery, so there would be a lot of pantomime, and if they were making mention to a bush that was right there, they would just pretend it was there. But they would have minor props if they needed just something in their hands. Their dress, their makeup, and their hair, however, were incredibly regulated in regards to who their character was and how that would help describe what their character was in life. And the show would begin at the first appearance of the sun, so most of the performances were at sunrise.
That was way too long.
Yeah.
Way too long.
So themes, subject matter, and plots. There were 2 rules in Sanskrit drama. The first was that it had to be set in India, and the second was that it had to be set after the Golden Age. But everything else was up to the playwright. And there were 5 stages of the plot that almost every play had. Those are the germ, the drop, the episode, the incident, and the denouement. And most of these are still present in pretty much every play today. The germ is sort of the beginning of the theme, the main idea where the action all starts. The drop would be where the action is set in motion again. So the germ, and then it would kind of sit for a little bit, and then the drop kicks it up again. And I could not find a definition for the episode and the incident, so we're just going to assume that those mean kind of what they do. And the denouement is the resolution, so the happy ending. And pretty much every Sanskrit play that was written, except for 2 historical plays, centers around love or heroism, and every single play has a happy ending. So I guess you could say that was another one. Plays were written for rich people, so the plays were very aristocratic, very idealist. They were not interested in accuracy at all. So they would focus on the creation of sentiment in the mind. So they weren't focused on a logical event occurring, but just rather, I'm going to make you feel something. So you're going to be impressed with me as a writer. So plot became secondary. And in a lot of plays, they're sort of criticized that way because there's not much logic to the plot. It just kind of keeps happening. The writing is very impressive. And so to achieve this, they would often employ magic. And there were 4 or 5 types of magic that they would use. Sometimes they would have objects that were endowed with magic power. Sometimes they would have sympathetic magic, where sympathy for someone else evokes some sort of magic to cure them or something. Meditative magic, where you can just meditate and you make something happen. They would have magical illusion in the plots, so like magicians today. And also, it's debated about whether or not curses were considered magic in the play in the periods in which they were. Some important playwrights. Basa is the earliest actual playwright that you could classify as a playwright that we know of. He was writing approximately around 300 AD, and he is praised for being incredibly original in his themes and his plots. He doesn't draw from a lot of other sources, so these are all ideas that he was coming up with on his own. He loved to write rapid action. He was not afraid to repeat situations in the same play, so often you would see the same scene 2 or 3 times, just with different dialogue. And his characters were very clever, especially his lovers and his heroes. Oh, and one thing he was really known for was making sure that even the smallest characters were completely fleshed out and they were actually real people. Now, Kalidasa, who was writing approximately around 480 AD, which would make him a contemporary of the Guptas, which some of you probably heard of, he's considered the, I guess you could say he was the Shakespeare of Sanskrit playwriting. He perfected the Sanskrit form. He wrote 3 plays. The first, and they were all tragedies, but they still had a at least positive ending. The first play was called Malavika Nimitra. And fun fact about this one is in his prologue, he apologizes for writing a new play instead of just performing one of the old ones. I thought that was kind of funny. It's a 5-act love drama that was first performed at a spring festival, so he sort of introduced that 5-act form to India. But his second play, which is called Shakuntala, is considered the best Sanskrit drama in the entire canon. It's centered around this king who goes to the forest to go hunting, and he sees this girl that he falls in love with. Stuff happens, he goes back to the palace, he forgets who she is, blah blah blah, they end up together. It's kind of funny. But yeah, it's considered the best play ever written by an Indian playwright. His last was called Vikra Morvaki, which they say is not as good as either of the other 2, so he was obviously not doing very well. And the last important one, his name is Baba Booty, which makes me laugh every time I say it. He was writing around 700 AD, but he also died in 700 AD as a prisoner of war. He was very much so a moralist, so all of his plays centered around moralism, and the characters were very moral people, and if they did something wrong, they would learn from it right away. He only wrote 3 plays. They have either 7 or 10 acts, and a lot of plays would range from anywhere between 1 and even 15 acts sometimes. But Baba Booty was really bad. He was not a good playwright, and I think that's what makes it important to show the other end of the spectrum. He had poorly constructed plots. He would have characters narrate things instead of having it happen on stage, and he would often cover up to 20 years in a play. And these are some pictures to show examples of costumes and makeup and stuff. as you can see, the men get very detailed. It's a little crazy. And lastly, the decline. Also, her face is real fine. Some reasons for the decline of Sanskrit drama were the invasion of the Mohammedans, who they invaded northern India and attempted to get rid of all Indian nationalism. And Sanskrit drama was very based in Indian nationalistic ideas, so they wanted to get rid of it. So they outlawed it in the area that they occupied. Because playwrights were writing for rich patrons, they would have this tendency to write stuff from the epics and write lyric verses that didn't really tell a story as much. But the rich people wanted to see a playwright who could write really well, so they would write these things that would be impressive but not necessarily stories. And towards the end of the Sanskrit reign in Indian theater, there was really a division of language between Sanskrit and what's called Prakrit, which was the language commonly spoken by people in India.